Welcome to the Non-Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Lampson. If this is your first time listening or your 50th time listening, this is what to expect on this episode. We dive into the concepts of developing your leadership toolbox. Why do you need this? You need this in any situation to help manage, lead, and control, and ultimately win. How do you do that? You can't use the same form of leadership in everything you do. So every episode, we dive into my leadership philosophy. We dive into the story and the background of the person we're talking to. And we also dive into some leadership traits I have accrued throughout the years. And then we also follow it up with a book review at the end. So you're getting a wide range of leadership topics and traits that you can add to your kit. So without further ado, let's go into the recap of this episode. And afterwards, if you love it, like it, share it, follow it, give us some feedback, because we're only just getting started. Here we go. On this episode, I'm joined with Chief Senior Master Sergeant Shaun Curry, who is currently the Command Sergeant Major of the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii, where they focus primarily on jungle training and tactics. I'm just going to get straight to the point. We primarily focus on the 3 leadership philosophies they go by over there. Be brilliant in the basics. Get 1% better. Relentless pursuit of excellence. How do you not want to freaking work hard after listening to those 3 philosophies right there? On top of the ones we cover with myself, we also cover leadership, not likership. Enemy has a vote, and then bring someone with you. All of those topics alone should get you excited to learn and understand what it takes to be a great leader and how to build those traits into your leadership style. All right, without further ado, let's get the show on the road. Let's go. All right, we're ready to go. I got my man Shaun here, just like you heard in the intro, and we're ready. We were already talking before, like I do on most of my episodes, getting the juices going, and sometimes it's like, hey, we're just going to hit record and get going. Because that's just how it is. So, Shaun, without further ado, we'll jump into the 3 H's: hometown, heroes, and hardships. For those who get to know you, and for me, get to know you as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on today. So, my hometown is Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. As a young man, I was raised by a single mom. I've got a sister who's older than me, and we had bounced around a little bit outside of Milwaukee. It's the larger city, and we ended up in a suburb called Wauwatosa. Currently, my hometown is Wahiawa, Hawaii, where it is roughly 6 o'clock in the morning, and we love it. We've been here about 4.5 years now.
What do you got for some heroes out there?
Okay. Very, I guess, fitting for the day, Veterans Day. My first hero would be my first team leader. So coming to the Army, I was 19. I had dropped out of college because I ran out of money to pay for it, and needed a change in my life. So that first NCO that I interacted with, Thomas Vitagliano, he was a former Marine, was Force Recon, got out, went to college, came back into the service, and was a Army Ranger NCO. So Tom taught me a lot of things about being an adult, about taking care of myself, and just the craft of being in the Army. Fast forward a few years, and Tom was killed in action, protecting a squad from a suicide bomber. And he just taught me a lot of things about selfless service and about the Army and about myself.
I love when people talk about heroes, especially the military ones, it's usually not the job they're teaching us as the hero, it's outside of the job. I talked about this in my last episode with coaches and teachers. Usually coaches and teachers that are heroes, like I have coaches that were my heroes. It wasn't the fact that they were the coaches that made them the hero. It was what they taught me outside of it, like how to be a good person, how to be a good, for me as my high school coaches, like how to be a good man, and so I hear you talk about that with NCOs in the military, where they weren't your hero because they were good at the job, which they probably were, but there were other things, like how to be good outside of your job, how to be good with yourself. And so that's huge to see.
Tom taught me a lot about being in the service, and he was a strict disciplinarian, but he also led as an older kind of service member, right? He had gotten out. He spent time in college before he came back in. And he was the first person I ever met with a laptop, right? So the back in the old days, without GPS, you had to like print out a map, and you followed Google Maps, and he would let us, my wife and I, use that so we could get home for holiday leave, and taught me about saving money, taught me about how to eat right, how to work out right, and just how to be an adult. Things I hadn't quite figured out yet.
I'm always really humbled and amazed on how some of people I talk to, and I think it's more in the Army, you guys are so good at remembering the names of those people who you've had in your career. Like, we were talking about Matt before, and, I've heard on Mentors for Mill where these guys will ramble off like these NCOs they've had, and it's like, name, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how do they do this? But I think you guys go through so much closeness and brotherhood, and just all that teamwork where you just know exactly who they are, where they're from, and they're always there with you. I look back at my team, and you're talking about your first NCO, and I had a really good first NCO, Sergeant McGrath. That was really similar. He was a cross trainee as well into the SEER community. First NCO I had, I think he was my team lead at the time, and I was 18 coming in as airman basic, and I remember just being like, "Hey, here's a guy, he's got a family, head on his shoulder, hard, just moving us, but then at the same time, he was super personable." I remember outside, he invited us over for Thanksgiving, some airmen over to his house, and all those extra traits that were just, and now I try to do that here, like I have airmen coming over to my house. We're calling it Pupsgiving this Thursday, this Saturday for all. We call new aviators in our squadron pups. That's a baby bat for being in the bat squadron, and so we have a lot of pups, and so I'm inviting them all over for a Pupsgiving, and it's just some of those things you take on throughout your career. Where when I was younger, I probably didn't realize the time he was putting in, or maybe what it cost for his family. Maybe it was stressful, or maybe it wasn't, but I look back and I'm like, so it's always cool to hear that. But yeah, the way you guys remember your names and those positions they wore, I'm like, man, that's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, that was 23 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just when someone can transfer knowledge, experience, and life. I didn't grow up with uh, I didn't grow up with my dad in the house, right? And so just having a positive male role model was super important to me, particularly at that time. Newlywed, 9/11 had just happened. I got to my first unit on September 8th, whatever the Friday was before 9/11. And I was in the Rangers, and we knew, like, hey, you're going to go. And he, without stride, no step in his stride, he just kind of went through. We were calm. We trained. We trained our faces off in all different types of weather and everything you get up in the Pacific Northwest. When we got to that first deployment, there was no question we were going to do our job and we were going to get home safe.
That's one thing I always appreciate when I listen to, I say the Army, those in the Army talk about the training you guys do for combat. And it's just so, I love it. I love when you guys are training and training and training. And I've heard on other episodes, the comfort versus crisis, and getting good at the basics so that when those experiences happen, it's not stressful. It's not crazy, right? You're just like, oh, it's just like training, but it's just a new location. And it's always just one of those things that the Air Force, there's jobs that do it, but it's not as much. And so I try to enforce it at the littlest levels possible, where it's more of the PT. Hey, if you guys can train hard now in PT, some of those situations in your stressful life or job may be easier. We don't do as much of the larger exercises, but we try to dive into it when we can. And so whenever I hear you guys talk about it, it's always one of those things where I'm like, it's always, this time we talk about, I love reaching out to the Army because those little standards, those getting good at the basics, building a routine. And now when it happens, it's just a new location.
Yeah. You've got the basics here on your list of traits and characteristics. Here, my commanding general and I, we talk to our team about being brilliant in the basics. Whatever your job is, if you're a technical proficiency kind of person, just understand all the small things. If you're combat arms and you're a rifleman, you should be the best darn rifleman there is on the planet, right? Um, and it doesn't take live ammunition to be the best at something. It's rehearsing the very small, minute tasks so that you can have the muscle memory. And then once you're ready, then we put you into training events. The SEALs call them evolutions. We just try to get you in a higher level of stress, right? So if you can get it in a pristine environment, and then we put you out to the woods, and now you got to walk through the jungle. Great. Now you're just 1% better, right? And that's another thing we talk about is being 1% better every day. And then you're good, you're proficient walking through the wood line. Now we're going to have you do it at night under nods, under load, right, with a pack on. And so that's the relentless pursuit of excellence. So those three things, being brilliant in the basics, 1% better every day, and a relentless pursuit of excellence is how we train and talk to our formation here in the 25th Infantry Division. And I will tell you that you can apply those to anything, right? Like, be brilliant in the basics. What is today's standard, right? Like, I was 30 seconds late to this because I was shaving. I know that this is a audio recording only, but for me, I needed to be in the standard before I sat down to talk to you. 1% better. I'm looking in the camera view, and my wife and I just moved into this house, and I can see behind me, like, I got boxes over here. In the back, there are like the cool guy army kind of paintings. I got my pull-up bar over here. Like, I probably need to clean up my office space, right? And so today, I will strive to be 1% better by cleaning up my office space. And the relentless pursuit of excellence is just not giving up when you think it's good enough. Good teams train until they get something right. Great teams train until they can't get it wrong. And so if you want to be great and you want to be ready before you go into combat, you have to train and train and train. The crucible of combat, it will find out when you weren't paying attention.
Yeah, there's a couple things I'll add on there. I like a line. It's the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And I look at that as if I'm doing really good, like at PT, right, or at my job, and I feel complacent, all I need to do is switch my focus to something else in my life. Like you're talking about, the way your room is set up, so I think of it the same way where, hey, if I feel comfortable here, what else am I maybe lacking on? Maybe I put too much attention in my PT where maybe the dishes are dirty, or my garbage is full, or my email box is decluttered or cluttered, and so I always tell a lot of people, if you feel like you're doing good in a certain area, just ask yourself, is that the way you do everything? Because I guarantee you there's probably somewhere where you're lacking or you don't think you have to focus on, but it's going to matter when you have a guest or, someone comes into your office and I use a lot of cleanliness as an example because it's so easy to control, but it has a huge impact. And I also say because I was on both sides, like when I started really diving into leadership, before I was very complacent in that aspect of my life thinking, oh, it doesn't matter, right? Because nobody's going to see it or who's going to care, if I'm really good in the jet. But now I've seen it flipped where, I was in our squadron a couple weeks ago or last week and I was sweeping the halls, and this lieutenant comes and picks up the broom for me and he's like, hey man, let me do this. I'm like, I got it, man. He's like, well, you're a major, you're doing it. I'm like, I'm not doing anything right now. Like, let me just clean it because one, it's dirty. And two, I have the time, right? Like, let me just knock it out, like you guys are busy because usually the pups or the younger guys, they're busy. They're doing all the creep in the squadron or they're trying to learn. And so I'll just do it. But then again, it also shows them like those are the areas that we get better at.
So you were talking about grabbing sweeping up, right? And there's a great book. I'll get to it towards the end, but one of the lines here is sweep the sheds. Never be too big to do the small things that need to be done. Everybody is watching all the time. You're a field grade officer. People pay attention to what you're doing in the small things. if I heard Columba talk about you know, being busy, making himself busy working. He cleans off his desk before he gets started with his day. Well, guess what? That guy's a recruiter, and people are going to walk into his office and they're going to see a professional desk. It may mentally feel like busy work or small, but it is a first impression that is going to affect somebody for the rest of their career if they go in to join the service with him. When people see, what's your job title?
ADO, so Assistant Director of Operations is like the fancy term. So
Yeah, so I mean, it is fancy. So the Assistant Director of Operations is sweeping up the hangar. That's a big deal for a young airman, and they're kind of ingrained to want to grab the broom from you and, hey sir, let me do that for you. But it just sets the tone for who you are and what your organization is. You're never too big to sweep the sheds.
Cool. Let's continue this going then. Did you have any other heroes, or do you want to jump straight into the hardship?
Let's go into hardship.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So in 2011, I was a first sergeant for 3rd Ranger Battalion. And at that point, senior NCOs had to go back through selection to be certified to lead. So I went through Ranger assessment selection as a young new soldier, and I did about 12 and a half years with 2nd Ranger Battalion there, 12 combat deployments. From the early days to the surge, which is about the time you came into service, and then I was wounded there, 2011. Didn't get treated for my injuries. Didn't get seen, for the traumatic stress I'd been going through. I go back through selection to be a first sergeant. Fast forward now, all of the stressors of work, stressors of life. My kids are getting older. We just conducted a PCS move, and we were doing just like we were talking about, realistic, tough training and preparation for combat. And I had 2 traumatic brain injuries back to back while jumping on an airfield. One week, one a week later. So that was about 2015 maybe, and all of these things just started to collide, and I didn't know what to do and who to talk to. And my spouse was the first one to notice, as they usually are, and she got a hold of a friend of mine, and they got me into a program up at Walter Reed called National Intrepid Center of Excellence, NICO. So the hardship is, I had been this go-getter, kind of larger than life Ranger NCO, and everything just kind of crashed in front of me. My identity was starting to slip. Like, who am I if I can't be this Ranger NCO that I've been for so long? And so while I was at NICO, they, I was there for inpatient 30 days of Walter Reed, and they really broke everything down to the raw, who I was and what I was doing. That probably wasn't great for my health and my livelihood. So I had to decide whether or not to stay in the Army. And in that process, I had I knew I couldn't stay in the Rangers, at least not on the special operations side. And so I resigned, and that was my identity. So that was really hard for me. But as a family, I was causing hardship to everybody around me, and that gave me an opportunity to really see myself, and it led to a journey of self-study. Starting to read again once I got my attention span back, listening to podcasts, just trying to be a little bit better than I was before. So I left the 75th Ranger Regiment after 2 more deployments, 14 total, 61 months deployed, and I went and taught at Ranger School. Um, for a year, I walked the swamps down at 6 RTB Ranger Training Brigade, and it was just this humbling experience for me of going from leading the premier light infantry units into combat to walking with a pack and just being out in the wood line and training future Ranger officer and NCOs. You know, my identity was before this go-getter in the front, and now I learned that I love to teach. And if I can't be one thing, what can I be? How can I help? And that's just been a continual journey for me since then. So 2017, I left the Rangers, and it's been a wild ride since.
I think it's just, man, it's what I really like is, in those jobs that you talk about where, like your job is your identity is stressful. It's very tough because while you're still in the military, like you talk about, you're focused on being the best at this job. And so when you can't, there's decisions we have to make. And it was great to, obviously we're talking about learning and developing and figuring out those different paths and how things happen for a reason and how it leads us down another one. You embraced it, and that's what's great is while, there may not be this road, there was this one and you fell in love with it. You opened up to it, and teaching is a phenomenal thing. Like my job prior before this being a SEER guy was teach people to live in the woods. And so I just really loved teaching, it was great. I didn't realize how much I loved it being that young, being 18 to 20 years old. So I was still young. So I didn't see the benefit of teaching. To me, it was a job. But I look back now to what it's led me to, being able to talk to people in public, starting a podcast, just doing all this stuff that it raised me to do. And then trying to cross train, and not having that identity and finding a new one. It all just lines up. And what most people should understand is while there's jobs we do and want to do, when things happen and you have to change paths, and I just talked about this on my last one. I think it was like, love the job you're in, right?
Yeah.
Give it everything you can and you'll have a great job. You'll have a great time. That's what's tough with some people is where they don't. And they think they may belong somewhere else, or they still belong back there, or that's who they were, and they can't be anybody else. When you understand where you're at, and this is another big one, is control what you can control. When you can do that, any job you're doing is going to be amazing. Like the last guy talked about, when he worked at McDonald's, he loved working at McDonald's. And so he made it a good job. And that is huge when it comes to personal growth and finding those wins in whatever you do.
Yeah, I mean, I could have gone down to be an instructor at Ranger School and just resented being down there. I mean, it was tough. I was doing a lot of physical therapy and a lot of behavioral health checkups and just kind of finally getting my stress under control, anger management under control. And I could have just let that consume me. But I didn't, right? And I did the Ranger instructor thing. I went and got a walking stick, and and you wrap it with your 550 cord and you put your little logo on it or whatever. And I mean, I went full bore. And it allowed me to see that I could be something different, personally, professionally, and emotionally. Right? I just been this one thing. When and you fly with the B1s.
Yep.
And I imagine that is a fraternity, right? It's a culture all on its own.
It is. No, it's 100%. Yeah, it's and you talk about it with your your Ranger team. Like you do hard things together for a reason. Like you train together, and being a B1 guy, same thing. Where we're not on the ground, but we're in the air doing what we got to do in those stressful situations. So we bond very, very close.
Oh yeah, no, I've called you in the real world, and what you can bring to the battlefield is is exquisite, right?
Mhm.
And I bet somewhere in your house is a bomber replica or a painting or a photo of you and your squadron, uh, after an event, right? Just like in my house, I've got things with the Ranger Scroll, I've got the Ranger Tab, um, but since all of that, I now work in the 25th Infantry Division, where the Army specific division. We train primarily in jungle environment, and we practice island hopping, and we train on lava rock because that's what's out here. Um, but I also have a lot of these taro leaves, right? This is our unit logo, um, and I've got those all over my house too. It's on the front of my house, as everyone knows where I live on the installation. Um, and you just have to be right, be a part of whatever that team is. Uh, Set the tone, let everyone know that you're all in two scoops, right? Yeah, identity identity crisis happens a lot. For the Army, when you transition from specialist E4 to sergeant E5, you know it's a 1 day change, right? You go to the board, you get selected, you go to your NCO academy, and you do your basic leaders course, is what we call it here. Um, that next day, you're a corporal or you're a sergeant, and you're the leader. That is yesterday we were best friends. Today I'm in charge. That is an identity crisis. Um, and you got to figure out the change, or you're not going to be good at your job.
Yeah, I've seen, I worked in the OSS for a few years, so I got to manage some airmen, and I saw a lot of airmen have a hard time with that. Senior airmen to staff sergeant for us, when they go to ALS, they're buddy with their senior airmen guys, and they come back and they got staff on, and, you sort of watch, like, okay, are they going to take that shift, or are they going to continue to ride the wave of the E4, senior airman path, but still try to be in charge? And it's very difficult for them. It's a tough transition.
Yeah,
Like on the officer side, I see it from the captain to major. That's where I've seen the big change, because you're a captain for, or a CGO for 8 years, right? When it comes to 2 and 4 for rank, and then all of a sudden you jump this shift, and like I still thought I was a captain per se, but everybody around me, they see that rank and they're like, oh, like if I would have been the captain, probably sweeping the hallways, it probably wouldn't have been as crazy. And it's, even though I'm the same person, I'm literally the same person. There's just this different rank culture, and so it's weighed heavy on me in times of like, hey, this definitely has to call more for me, so I need to be all in and do what I can. And while I'm still the same person, I need to understand, there's some areas I just gotta focus in and lock in on, and that's where I try to make sure I'm good at the basics, understanding my PT, and getting better in the jet as I'm getting back into flying. But it's just been a wild ride.
yeah. Those periods of change for leadership positions, civilian or otherwise, right? Like my son just took an exam to be a manager. He works at Taco Bell while he's saving up money for college, and he does mixed martial arts, and so he works at Taco Bell, right? He's got to make his money. Um, he just took the exam to be a manager. So next week he's a manager, and it's about leadership, not likership.
Yeah.
It's not about people liking you. It's about being brilliant in your basics, and that's the standards, right? And I'm sure his corporation has standards that he has to apply and uphold people to. And he's got to teach. And if you can't do those, if you can't coach, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah, that was a great line. Leadership, not likership. I like that. I
Yeah,
wrote that down.
yeah,
So.
yeah.
It's hard, right? It's
It's
very
tough.
difficult as a leader to want to be liked, to know you're doing a good job.
Yeah,
And but usually, if you are a good leader and you're doing the right things, it's gonna work out. It's just it takes time. And
Yeah.
that's where, like, when we can talk about it right now, like that trust and building relationships and leading by example, all those little things stack up in the long run to, obviously in the long term get to be liked, but if you're doing the right thing, it's gonna happen regardless.
Yeah. I think I heard in one of your earlier podcasts you talk about the probably my generation of leaders grew up in a service where punishment was physical,
Mm-hmm.
and we probably didn't talk to each other with dignity and respect. And those generations taught your generation, and your generation is in this mix of how hard do I push my troops or my airmen versus I have to shift my leadership style to a way that they're going to connect with. Um, and if you are upholding your standards of your organization, whatever it is, right? If it's you and you've got to know the ins and out of your aircraft, and you've got an airman whose job it is to make sure that that thing is running, like a Swiss watch, and they're not, well, you got to hold them to standard. And the difference between the two is you don't have to make them run laps around the aircraft. You can probably do it differently with dignity and respect. Like, hey, this is wrong. Let's fix it, right? I sent you 2 headshots. One of them is me as a first sergeant, and I'm overseeing training, preparing my folks for combat. I just love that photo because I know what I'm looking at. No one else should see it. I am looking at a formation that is training for excellence. They're in their pursuit of excellence. The other one is my command photo here. It hangs up on the wall, and it's a big cheesy smile. Because guess what? One, I'm happy to be in the position, and two, as the senior sergeant major on my installation, I don't have to be the guy that yells, and that's pretty awesome, right? I'm still a sergeant
Yeah.
major. I can make corrections, but I don't have to be the guy that's yelling or angry face all day. Uh, it's a change. It's a shift in how you lead.
Yeah, I think that shift of the generational leadership, where it's not as much do as I say, right? To go do it. And I've been caught when I was younger in my leadership skills of why do you keep asking why? Like just stop asking why, just go do it. And I've talked about it plenty of times where the Marines do a very, but that's their leadership ethos style, where they do a great job following orders, right? Like they are very rule based, and they will do that, and they'll go do the mission, and that's really based on trust. Like those NCOs that are telling them to go do it, they've built the experience, they've built leadership, they've done that. In some communities, it's hard for the airmen, especially in the Air Force, to believe that leadership in their NCOs because in the Air Force, the NCOs don't get to show it as much, show that leadership of doing the job because they're in their supervisor role. They're in more of a managerial role. So when they're telling airmen to go do something, it has to be followed up with a why just to get them to go do it, but also to give them the comfortability that the leader knows what they're telling them to do. Because blind trust is dangerous, but then it's also, it's just dangerous. And so there's this shift of these NCOs figuring out how to tell them why.
Yeah.
Instead of just like the TO says, or you have to get the mission done. There's just that fine line of building that, and it's not easy.
Yeah, there's so you kind of hand out books to folks all throughout life, and there's one that I gave when I was a battalion CSM. So 2 below you is who you're kind of leading, right? Or mentoring.
Yep.
So as a battalion command sergeant major, I was leading and mentoring sergeants first class, platoon sergeants, and many of them were staff sergeants, kind of fleeting up. And those folks are they're just trying to learn how do I lead, right? And there's a author, Brene Brown. Her book is called Dare to Lead. How to become a daring leader who motivates and inspires employees. And it has nothing to do with the military. And if I were to give that out to folks, 10 years ago, they would be like, what the heck am I reading? Right. Um, but it's about helping you help other people find their potential. Um, what is that 1% better you can squeeze out of a person or help them see? Anyways, that's a great one. It's not the one I want to say at the end, but that is a fantastic book for maybe the senior airmen that are trying to lead, technical experts, um, by just being themselves.
Shoot, Shaun blank. Oh yeah, finding your leadership is hard.
Yeah.
I wish there was like some easy like way in the military. In the Air Force we have ALS, then we have NCOA, but they're not leadership development courses per se. They're more supervising, and so like I didn't find my leadership style until I was 35 years old. And I'm like, dang, why can't I find it when I was like 18 or 19? And one of the things I love about I guess waiting so long is there's never one style. And that's where I think a lot of stress comes with leadership, especially, I'll just say every level, is everybody assumes that whatever role you're in, there's a certain, like you have to bring your style in, or it's the same style everywhere you go when it's not. And I think we've heard on plenty of podcasts, it's usually your leadership changes about the people you're around and not who you are. And that is what's hard to do.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips on that as far as like some of those people developing those leadership traits, or how, what can they do?
Yeah. So there's so I have three children. My oldest is 25 and my youngest is 19. They are all totally different personalities. They have different, professional goals. They have different personal, uh, loves outside of work. All three of them need a different leader, and the
Thanks.
that leader, yeah, mine was just over here too. The but you can be the one leader who can lead all three, and you just have to figure out what motivates people. I was speaking to a group of South Korean military academy cadets, and they're trying to lead conscripts, and the question was, how do I get my conscripts to follow me? All right, well, you're going to do exactly what you're telling them to do. You're going to do it too. Your uniform is going to be as pristine as it needs to be for that situation, and you're going to give them a purpose, to give them a why. Pretty easy for the South Koreans. Their why is to be able to show a credible force so that North Korea doesn't come south. If you're working in a shop, the why is to make sure that that aircraft is in pristine condition in the event that the crew needs to go and drop bombs out of it. The why can be told in different ways, and it doesn't have to be through force. Sometimes it does, right? If you're a Marine and you're a Marine leader, guess what your junior Marines are going to do? When you get on a beach, you're going to have to forcibly move them up the sand, because there's probably a 7.62 automatic weapon system pointed in the other direction, and it takes strict discipline to get folks moving. There's no right answer to that, and sometimes it's being in an intellectual safe space so you can fail in your leadership, but grow through your failure.
Yeah, I've found, obviously having tools to start is always a good starting place for anybody with leadership, is understanding there are multiple tools out there and you have to, plug and play them in your office or your shop or your team. That was one thing I lacked when I became a flight commander early on in my career, was I didn't have the tools necessary for what leadership traits were going to fit. So I had the ones I knew of, which are pretty simple, like direct, right, or authoritarian, or PT is always a good one, lead by example there. And it worked for a little bit in some areas, but when I see the long run of it, there are definitely probably other areas I could have plugged in some different leadership traits. And so now that's what I try to do now. Whenever I meet, and it can just be meeting one person. I'm trying to figure out what do they need? What is the leadership style they like? Is it different between everybody? That can be very tiring in a large shop with 20 or 30 people. Is this person doesn't like it when I'm direct? This person does like it when I'm direct. But that's where building relationships come into play. And we'll jump into my leadership philosophies. I'll throw them out there really quick for those listening, if it's your first time or if you've heard before. But I've developed these to help me sort of guide my day, right? With a lot of choices I make or opportunities I do or things I come across, they try to align with these. So lead by example in all you do. To be selfless, you have to be selfish. Build relationships based off trust and care. And then challenge the road in front of you by getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And so building relationships is a great way to understand which leadership styles apply. And so that's always one that's hard for a lot of people to do. Do you have any input on those? Or
Yeah. So, leading by example, I think we've been talking about it kind of throughout is just don't tell people to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. Right here in Hawaii, we have the Jungle Operations Training Course. It is a kind of a orientation to how do I become a light fighter and move through the jungle. At the end of it, you get a little tab that says jungle, and you can wear that on your sleeve, just like a ranger tab or an Arctic tab. And you get to wear a boonie cap all day long versus the patrol cap. Well, I got to Hawaii during the height of COVID. I got here, I went to isolation for 2 weeks. They dropped off a pair of ropes so I could tie knots and practice. And a week after coming out of isolation, I went to jungle school. Right? I'm not going to tell people to do something that I haven't done or tried to do myself. So lead by example. Building relationships based on trust and care. I would say don't change who you are, just be who you are. And people will see you, the real you. And it's tough for leaders, because sometimes we have to put on a persona to get things done safely in a timely manner at a time of crisis. And if you put on something that isn't you, folks, your people will see right through it. And now they're going to second guess who you are every time, like which Curry is showing up to the meeting, right? And then your last one here, challenge the road in front of you by getting comfortable being uncomfortable. I would also say you need to be comfortable in times of crisis and ambiguity. And in order to do that, you have to build a foundation of hard, realistic training. You have to build a foundation of understanding yourself, right? And I know you do a lot of foot marches and tough PT. You got to get inside that pain cave and see what your mind and body is going to do when you don't think you can do it. There was a time there, I'm a bit of a thrill seeker, right? So there was a time that I was running marathons and I wanted to see how hard could I push myself. I wasn't a fast runner. And so in order to push myself harder, I did harder events, right? I did the Baton Death March. And I think that you've done that as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so I did it 1 year. And then when I was at the Sergeant's Major's Academy, I went back and did it again. The second time I ranked probably in the top 20 for my age group. And then I was like, all right, well, now how do I get harder? How do I push myself harder? And in Texas, they've got a great trail running community, and somehow I ended up in ultra marathons. Right, and I'm a big guy. I'm like 220, And that's a lot to move. Most of those racers are really small.
Yeah.
But the community was great, and they allowed me to see, like, I not only can I trail run, but I can do an ultra marathon over a mountain, over the span of 2 days. And that was great. I'm in my 40s now. I don't need to do that anymore. But I do still find places where, like, I'm not quite, um, I'm definitely not comfortable, right? I got to find a place. Doing these podcasts, it's a little uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
Primarily because I don't know why people want to talk to me. But it's if it's a shared experience that helps somebody else get a little bit better tomorrow, then I'll do it. Large crowds, speaking in large crowds has always been a little uncomfortable for me, introvert in nature. But if I don't go to those events, what gets missed? And maybe someone is trying to learn about themselves and their leadership ability, and they see something that I do, positive, that they want to take on. And I would add to your list of things here, to be a good leader, you need to watch the others take the good and note the bad. And that's kind of a way for young leaders to build on their own kit bag of leadership traits. I like this, and I like that you have, your 4. That's like, this is who you are. That's your leadership identity. And for new folks in leadership positions, it's trial and error, but it's still you, right? You just still got to find who you are, and you don't know until you kind of get thrust into that position. I'm a high school wrestler, right? I was a co-captain my senior year. Well, I had no idea what I was doing, but people knew my personal traits. I was going to work hard. I wasn't going to be last, and I was always going to do every drill, right? I was going to do the small stuff. And so when it became time for me to lead, they already knew me. Same thing works when you're a young E4 and you're going to E5, or if you're going to go be a staff and then, or lance corporal, right? Like, folks know who you are before you become a leader. Now, it's tough when you have to PCS and nobody knows you. And you have to start right here. Lead by example. When you're new to an organization, you just do everything. Relentless pursuit of excellence. You are doing everything the exact same. You said it earlier. How you do anything is how you do everything, right? And then you start building those relationships. People around you will see you. They see what you're doing. They see that you're working hard. You're pushing yourself to levels of being uncomfortable, and they're going to follow you because they know that you can.
Yeah, it's always great when obviously these are repeated, right? Because it just shows people like it's not just one person that's doing it. And that's what I love about leadership. We're not making these up. They're not new types of skills. We have watched good people use them, and we've watched bad people not use them, and we just add them to our box. And so this is, I think, the third one in a row where we've talked about watching those around us. Like if you want to get to a certain level, like the last episode we talked about, the airman wanted to get the BTZ, which is below the zone, and he just watched other people that got it before him. What did they do? Same as when you want to make rank. Like, how did that person make it? Oh, well, maybe I need to start implementing some of that. And it may seem odd when you do it at first, but then you're going to find your niche for how it fits you. If you notice they're always showing up 5 minutes early and you're on time, well, maybe you got to shift it a little bit and show up 5 minutes early, to be there when other people show up on time. And so that's why that one is very key, because I don't want people to understand leadership is not new. It's not. It's not. It's most of us that have developed our skills, we've got them from somebody else. And that's what the main thing is: getting them, looking at them, applying them throughout wherever you're going. And then you sort of have those notches of, I did this one this time, it worked. This one didn't. Okay, let's move on to this one. And maybe this old one works here, and maybe this one doesn't. It's definitely difficult and stressful.
Yeah. Yeah. And over time, in the service, we've got positional power, which is based on your rank and position. And then you've got personal power. And in times of crisis, you want people to follow you through personal power, but it is going to land on positional.
Yeah.
In times of ambiguity or crisis, people will follow. They'll follow you because they know you.
Yeah.
And so it'll be personal power that drives. You can lead folks into combat, or lead folks into a seer survival lane. If you're not true to yourself, people will second guess you, and they will find somebody else to follow.
Yeah, there's a good reference to Band of Brothers, right? The things like the first few episodes where it talks about the guy from Friends. I can't remember his name. My buddy just messaged me, but he does a great job in Garrison, leading. But obviously, it shows in the show when he got to the stressful situations and they're ramping up for combat. He didn't do a good job, And so his team were doubting him as a leader, and so that's a great example there of a show perspective on what it looks like. I use Ted Lasso a lot in my leadership skill now because that show has flipped the script on, the older mentality of leaders, right, in the coaching world where we thought of them as real authoritarian, yelling and doing all this stuff and knowing the game very well, like experts in the game. And then Ted Lasso, even though it's a made-up sort of story, but it's a great story, he comes in not knowing soccer or anything like that, but he knows people and he builds relationships with the team and he gets the team to work better because they know each other. And that is a huge shift I've seen in leadership and it sort of talks about, ties in earlier, we talked about that generational explaining the why. When you understand the people, sometimes you don't have to explain the why because they know you. And you just mentioned it, that you've built your leadership based on the personal side, and they'll go out there and do it and they'll work pretty hard. Because most of the times we're leading people who know what they're doing. It's, if you're in the Air Force, you're leading somebody that knows the job. They're an expert at that skill. They just need some guidance to be pushed a little bit further. So once you can find how to motivate them, they'll work a little bit harder. That's what I love about Ted Lasso, man. I don't think he really gets to know soccer throughout all 3 seasons. I think at the end he talks about it a little bit where he understands it, but still, like, and because he's working with experts, he's working with people that know the game, so he doesn't have to teach them X's and O's. He just has to teach them how to work together, and that's like that missing piece he finds.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a great example, right? As you become more senior in service, my job is the senior enlisted leader or senior enlisted advisor for U.S. Army Hawaii and the 25th Infantry Division, right? 2 separate tasks. I cannot be an expert in both. But what I can be is I am a sensor. I go out and I assess all of our teams, and if I find a team that's not working, to its full potential, then I work with those leaders to bring them up, right? And then I go back, and when we make plans, I can say which team is ready to go, and which team needs a little bit more time and development. I'm not necessarily the expert in communications, let's say, right? But I go down to my communications office, and we are talking about using new radios and using new things on the computer. It's totally out of my element, and I have to trust them at being an expert. I'm just watching how are they working as a team, and it is insane at my level to think that I could be an expert in everything, right? Like, you fly an aircraft. Do you know how to turn a wrench on that aircraft?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I don't want you to. I want you to be the best darn pilot you can be, and I want that mechanic, the aircraft mechanic, and you do too, to be the best mechanic in the Air Force. And they know and trust you to be a good leader, to be able to fly that thing. And if you can give them trust in their skills, then they're going to be that much better for you. They're going to put more effort into it.
Yeah, that's a hard thing with the military, right? How we move up, we sort of lose that expertise in the job based off our shift and schedule. And so it's very difficult for some leaders to maybe feel like that to maintain that expertise to be credible. But, just like we've talked about, if you apply some of the skills and traits we've mentioned, they will understand. And that sort of ties me into another one of transparency, and I hit it on the last one where if you're in that position where you feel like you've lacked those skills or you just don't do it as much, you have to be open with the people that you're working over, like, hey guys, I'm not, like you said, I'm not the expert in these comms. I don't know this, but I can give you some guidance here and do this, or maybe I've done this in my past to show them, oh, well, what he was an expert in, he was pretty good in. So I have to take that, as that grain of salt. And that is a very hard leadership ladder to climb where, some leaders are very good at the technical side, so they try to always do that. And they think that's what all that matters. And that's where it really, they lose the personable side as they move up.
Yeah. That's back to being brilliant at basics.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm in the Army, and one of the very basic things that we must do is qualify a weapon system. And so, last week, me and a few other folks from the staff went to the range, and we shot pistol. And we stayed, and we shot until everyone was qualified. Now, I'm not the greatest at shooting pistol, but I went out there and I shot, and I'm there with everybody else. There's nothing special. There's no special treatment. And when I was done qualifying, I went out there on the range and I was safetying folks moving up and down the range. I am, or was, trained as an infantryman. That's my task. I got to be brilliant at it. And other people have to see that I can do that. And it was raining and, a beautiful day in the jungle, and everybody else is out there with us and they're getting miserable too. And, you could be a leader who goes there, does the thing, and leaves. Or you can be a leader who goes out and shares hardship with their subordinates. The one that shares hardship, the one that shares that time with somebody, they're going to follow you more because they'll trust you.
Did you have any traits you saw you wanted to cover before we jump into a book? Or
all right, let's see. Be able to act when stressed. You have to be able to. You have to be able to work in times of crisis. And as a leader, folks are going to look towards you in times of crisis. I think back to days of being overseas in combat situations, and not every day was exciting, or kind of that movie lifestyle idea of what combat was. And the days where we made contact with the enemy, I mean, that's a time of crisis. That's a time of ambiguity because the enemy gets a vote. I heard someone say that earlier on.
That's what I was going to bring up earlier too. Was that? Yeah.
Yeah, and you can be as highly trained and as skilled as you can be, but that enemy gets a vote. And when that vote changes your plan, as all plans change, you have to be able to make a decision. There's analysis paralysis, right? Where you're making a plan and you just kind of get stuck in this circle of, oh, if I can make it a little bit better, make it a little bit better.
Yeah.
If you let great consume the good, you're never going to make a decision. And you have to get the ball moving. Saying lots of buzzwords, but it kind of boils down to, Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And you either have to take that punch and move on, or you let that punch knock you out. And so make a decision when you're stressed out. I do like the network is key, and I didn't do this very well as a younger NCO, because I was kind of zeroed in on my team, my platoon, um, and really just my first company, Bravo Company, Second Range Battalion. And the relationships with those folks that I met over there, I still talk to them. Again, 20 years ago. What I failed to do was look outside of my bubble. And I didn't start doing that until I left and started teaching. And then I went to the Sergeant Major's Academy, and I met all these other great NCOs out there in the Army. And I worked for 5th Security Forces Brigade and JBLM, and I got to travel and talk to folks. And, well, how did you do this in the Pacific? I'd never been in the Pacific, so I met all kinds of folks. You're just adding to your proficiency, and in times of need, it's great to have experts around to call.
Yeah, I try to teach a lot of my airmen that here with just the group workouts I do, where I'm bringing airmen from different jobs, and it's like a subtle, like, hey, you guys, network is key, without telling them, because I want them to know when you're on a base and you're trying to get things done, sometimes the easiest and quickest way is to be like, oh, I worked out with this guy that works in, security forces or comm, and my computer's all messed up, or I need access. Let me shoot him a text, and it's an important one, and a lot of people don't like to say networking. It's definitely a buzzword but it's crucial, and especially when it comes to times of if you're new to a place or you're in a new job and you're trying to figure out what to do or get a task done quick without asking people what's going on. And that's where the relationships come into, because sometimes it's just building relationships with people around you. They don't have to be within your team, but just going to say hi to the person at the gate every now and then, or person that's cooking your food in the DFAC, asking them how their day is going. That's building relationships and networking at a personable level outside of your job, so that, if you ever had a question about something, you can be like, oh, like that guy may know me because I said this. It's always a subtle one, but it can go a long way.
Yeah, there's two things here in Hawaii that I see the NCOs are using for networking outside of their own organization. One is the Sergeant Audie Murphy's Club. There's a board you have to attend. It's pretty arduous, really hard training to get into it. Most folks study for a year to do it. 1% of Army NCOs can achieve this. And not by total numbers, it's just by how much hard work. But there's an Audie Murphy Club at every Army base across the globe. And so if you are a member of this club and you showed up to Hawaii today, guess who you're going to call? You're going to go find the Audie Murphy Club, and now these folks are going to help you assimilate into living in Hawaii. So you already have a built-in connection, right? The other one is Better Opportunities for Single Soldiers, BOSS. This is where usually junior folks, they've got a place to go to. Ours is an old bar. We renovated it. It's got pool tables. It's got video games. It's got a stage for movies and things. And it's centrally located on our base. So if you're a brand new soldier, during in processing, we tell them, go see BOSS. They've got something for you. And those folks, they do hikes across the island. They do beach cleanups and volunteerism. They've got game nights and video games and card games, and right, it's just to get people out of their kind of dorms or their barracks and spend time. But guess what? It's a built-in connection. You're meeting people from across the Army at a young age, and eventually you're going to call them. And you want to be able to call them with relationship-based versus, hey, I'm jacked up and I need help.
Yeah. Any more that you got, or?
I mean, you got a lot on here. It's grit is something that I think everybody should try to enhance. And it's not easy.
No,
Not everyone's job requires that, but you as a human require grit. You need to push yourself a little bit better every day, that 1% better, um, and it takes grit to do it. If you come home and your uniform is jacked up because you're out in the wood line, I mean, you got to clean it. And you might be dog tired. You just want to go to bed, but no one goes into the bed covered in jungle moss. You got to shower. You got to clean your stuff. You got to have a little bit of grit to continue to push through to finish the task. If you're out there working out and the goal was X amount of repetitions, we all have those days where we forget to count a few, or we add a little extra, right? That's testing your intestinal fortitude. That's great. Are you doing this workout because someone told you to? Probably not, right? Like, you're doing a workout for betterment, and you're not going to get better if you skip a few. No one does Murph and says, that pull-up counted, right? Because there's a purpose, right? There's you don't sign up to do the hard things and then not do them. So you got to have grit in your life. I think everybody should. Yeah.
Well, let's jump into the final part of the show with the book recommendation. What do you got for us today? You already dropped one, so I'll add that one in there as well. But your secret sauce.
Yeah. If you want to know about my leadership style, there's a book called Legacy by James Kerr. I'm sure someone has already brought it up to you. It's about the All Blacks. They're the national rugby team for New Zealand, and I already dropped one of their lines about sweep the shed.
There's the shed. I thought that sounded familiar. I was like, man, I know that line.
Yeah, I mean, I love these.
Yeah, it's a good book. Yeah, there's a reason why it's on so many military people's top, because it's not a military book.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the military. The know thyself.
Yeah.
Ritualize to actualize, create a culture, be a good ancestor, write your legacy. Yeah. I mean, this is my most handed out book.
Nice.
Across probably the last 4 years or so. And then, not a leadership book per se, has leadership traits talked in it, is a book called White Sun War.
I feel like I've heard that one on one of my shows too.
For it. It's a futurist. It's a futurist discussion about a fictional account of war where People's Republic of China invades Taiwan.
I just heard about this book recently.
And
it's gonna bug me.
It's by Mick Ryan, and if you're an Audible guy or gal, it's a quick read. But if basically it takes the tech we have now on both sides and fast forward about 10 years to what could be, and it's incredible. I've spent so much time thinking about how do I prevent war, and it gives you kind of a glimpse of what war could be. So like you said, where do I need to be? Where am I now? And where do I need to get to? And how hard do I have to train or input or innovate to get to there? That is a realistic, could be future of conflict, and it's eye-opening. It really is.
Yeah, Legacy is a good book. The crazy story I have on that, and I'll try to make it quick, was when I was deployed last year to the AOC in Sumter, I traveled up to Fayetteville to visit some TACP guys because I was trying to cross train. And I walked into one of their shops, and obviously when I go into somebody's shop now, I look at what books they're reading. That's just like. And so I
Yeah.
look at this guy's desk, and I was like, "Hey man, what book is that?" He's like, "He's like, I'm not reading it. You can read it." And so I was like, "Okay." I drove back because I was going back up in a couple weeks to do another workout with them. I read it like in a week, that book,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" So I went back and I was like, "Hey man, here's your book." He's like, "You read it?" I was like, "Yeah, dude, it was amazing." So like that little, and all I did was ask him about the book, and he let me read it, and I brought it back, and it's one of my tops for me to recommend to people, or if I need to like buy like a couple books to hand out, it's just there, super simple,
Yeah.
and I think everybody can relate to the All Blacks, which is everybody knows of the All Blacks. They may not know rugby, but we've heard stories of the All Blacks, and like you said, it's not military focus. It's just like just to be a better person, do the right thing. And so, yeah, great book. The book I brought is the one I recommended last time, but I'm still reading it. Is Brief by Joseph McCormick.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I bring it up
That's a
today
great
is
one.
because I'm doing a reading group with it with 3 or 4 airmen that I work out with. So we're starting it today. We're going to read 4 chapters a week, and after each, we're going to type up a 1-page sort of 3 questions. Like what did I learn? How am I going to implement it? And what are some examples? And that way, we're all going to read each other's topics and papers and discuss it. And this is just a reading club I'm probably going to keep doing. And I learned about this book listening to his podcast first. Those two, they're only 15-minute episodes. That's why I like him. But every episode, he goes, "Oh, I have this book Brief," and I'm like, "Dang, I'm buy this damn book." So I hear it every episode. So I did, and so Matt was actually one of the ones who mentioned the book when I posted it. He's like, "Great book," and I'm like, "Sir, why did you tell me about this book?" But he talks about it a lot too.
Matt uses there's a planning chart of how you're going to have a conversation or run a meeting. That's how Matt preps for his podcast.
He told me about that. He said he took a lot of the pictures, and I think it's something mapping, brief mind mapping or something like that. But
Brief map. And
brief map.
About 2 years ago, we did a leader professional development in our brigade where we brought Joe McCormick's team out, and he did a brief lab. That's what they called it. And it was we were building a new team. We brought them up to an offsite here on the Marine Corps side of the island. It's very beautiful on that side, and all of the senior leaders got this discussion. And I'm like, if only someone had done this when I was a staff officer, right? Like, I mean, how many times have you sat in a meeting where it's like, this is a meeting for a decision, and at the end you're like, all you did was tell me about things and you didn't ask me a question, right? Like, why was I in this meeting? And so it is, it's so important to think about what you're going to say before you say it, particularly in those scenarios. And for you as a leader, like, how do you take meetings?
Yeah.
How do you want them to be held? Is the Army or the military way a meeting on the calendar is an hour because you can't make it a 45-minute time block on the calendar? I mean, like, do we have to be in there? How many meetings have you been in where it said it was an hour and it went 2, and now the whole rest of your day is trash? Great book. Great. Thank you for sharing that with airmen. First of all, thanks for sharing it with airmen. I wish someone had shared that theory with me much earlier, particularly when I was on staff. 2, you having the ability to reach out to service members. Hey, we're going to do a book club. Who wants to join? That is incredible. We need more leaders across the services to help share that information. And then I think I heard you say you're going to write some papers.
Yeah, so after each 4 chapters, we're just going to write just a 1-page synopsis of 3 questions, like, what'd you learn? How are you going to implement it? And what are some examples? Very basic stuff. But, if you don't write it, Matt talks about a lot as well, writing it out, doing the thing, just helps execute it more.
Yeah. You connect when you write. Mm-hmm. And I was just in a short meeting about writing, and the Army has started the Harding Project, which is a way to get leaders to write more, to get our voices back into the technical journals for our jobs, and
Yeah.
telling the story of the Army. Well, the NCO Corps has a version. They're inside the Harding Project. It's called the Muddy Boots Project, and it's tell your story or tell your thoughts in 1,500 words or less. Right? I'm not writing for the Business Journal. I'm writing for other enlisted and young leaders, to hear a story and get it quick, because my audience, um, if you've listened to me this long, for 1 hour and 15 minutes, give or take, right? Like,
Yeah.
you've got a good attention span.
Yeah.
Most folks are only listening to about 15 seconds. They're hitting sound bites and they're moving on. And you helping the enlisted corps write is crucial.
Mhm.
The NCO voice, you're out there. I see the NCOs working, but your voice is not heard outside of the office. What is the NCO story? What is the enlisted service member story? And it starts by just getting comfortable and learning to write. Because most of us got out of high school and we joined the Army.
Yeah.
And the other half, you tried a life. Maybe you came out of high school and you went to college for a little bit, like me, right? And you drop out. Or you went to a professional life and you were doing that before you joined the service. You probably weren't writing a whole lot. Write like it's your job. Tell people about what you do. It's super important. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. No, I'm doing it because I didn't have it, and I want them to, get to where I'm at and be better. Like, I look a lot about
Yeah.
when I was younger, growing up, and I remember talking to some guys when I was lifting and being like, "Oh, when I get to your age, I'm going to lift more," in that mindset. But I want them to be like, "I'm going to be a better leader than where you are now," and that's my goal. So that 15 years from now, when they're in my position, I can look back and be like, "Man, you're way better than where I was
Yeah.
at that spot."
Yeah, as you grow in your time in service, people are watching.
Mm-hmm.
They're seeing you go places. You got to bring someone with you.
Yep.
Lead with empathy. Figure out what that is that someone needs help with, or maybe some guidance, and just pull them up with you. It's not it's no longer a singular sport. There's people all around you who need something, advice, training, a skill set, and you're not going to be able to do whatever your job is by yourself. You need people around you.
Perfect. Well, I will end it there, even though, that's why I love the shows, because usually towards the end is when it really gets going. And I'm always like, dang it. But I said on my last show, the reason I love this format, we warm up with the conversation, right? Getting to know each other. Then we sprinkle in some leadership traits. Then towards the end, when we hit them hard, everybody's like still there. They're an hour and 17 minutes in, like you talked about, and they're just like, keep going, and that's what's great. And so we finished with the book, some extra flavor on top. Thank you for your time. I'll reach out to you for some follow up. If they want to connect with you.
Yeah.
But we're gonna hit stop. We're gonna let it finish. Is there anything last you wanted to say?
No. Thanks. Thank you for this. It's a great time. I'm going to go put together my uniform and get ready for Veterans Day. For everybody out there, those veterans, thank you for your service. Those still active, thank you for volunteering to serve your country, and wearing the cloth of our nation.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right.